There are moments in life when pain does not come from disobedience. It comes from exactly the opposite, from obedience. It is when you do what you believe is right. You pray with sincerity. You make difficult decisions to please God. You give up shortcuts. You say no to things everyone else says yes to. And still, nothing happens. No door opens. No answer comes. No visible change appears. And inside the heart, a silent question is born, almost forbidden to be spoken out loud. God, is obedience really worth it? This pain is deeply spiritual, because it is not rebellion against God. It is frustration with His silence. You keep going to church. You keep believing. You keep trying to do good. But it feels like your life has stopped, while everyone else's has moved forward. You look back and think, if I had done things differently, maybe I'd be better off today. If I had disobeyed just a little, maybe I would have seen some results by now. This is the pain of someone who is not far from God. It is the pain of someone trying to walk with Him, but unable to understand the path. And the hardest part is not the waiting. It is the feeling that God could say yes, but chose to say no. Or worse, chose to say nothing at all. This frustration creates a dangerous inner conflict, because, little by little, obedience begins to feel unfair, and faith begins to feel naive. The person does not want to abandon God, but no longer knows how to keep trusting Him. They begin to ask, is God testing me? Did I do something wrong? Did He forget about me? And the heart grows tired of obeying without understanding, tired of doing what is right without seeing fruit, tired of believing that God knows what He is doing when everything seems to contradict that. If you have lived through this, or if you are living it right now, know this important truth. This pain does not automatically push you away from God. In fact, it reveals something very deep. You do not want blessings alone. You want meaning. And it is exactly there that one of the hardest and most transformative journeys of faith begins. In the end, spiritual frustration is not only about what did not happen, it is about what we expected God to do. When we obey, there is almost always a hidden expectation in the heart. Even if we do not admit it, we think, if I do the right thing, God will make things easier. If I obey, He will reward me quickly. If I am faithful, it should not hurt this much. And when that does not happen, the pain grows because something deeper has been touched. Our relationship with control. The spiritual question behind frustration is not, why didn't God answer me? But rather, do I trust God even when He does not explain Himself to me? That question reveals something delicate. Many times, we obey expecting to understand everything later. But God, in many moments, calls us to obey before we understand, and sometimes without ever understanding. This is where faith stops being comfortable. Because faith is not only believing that God can, it is believing that He knows what He is doing, even when the path seems illogical. Spiritual frustration is born when obedience seems not to work, sacrifice seems not worth it, waiting seems to have no purpose, and then a silent temptation appears to turn God into a system of exchange. I obey, God rewards me. I do my part, God does His. But when God says no, that system breaks, and the heart is exposed. At that point, there are two possible paths: to harden the heart and obey without love, or to mature in faith and obey out of trust. God does not allow this pain to push us away. He allows it to reveal us, to reveal whether our faith is based on results or on His character. And it is exactly this tension that we find in one of the most unsettling stories in the Bible. A story where God says no in a way that seems cruel, where obedience makes no sense at all, and where prosperity is not material, but deeply spiritual and emotional. To understand this, we need to go back to a man who walked with God for decades, and who, even so, was called to obey without understanding. The story that helps us understand the pain of obeying without understanding is found in Genesis chapter 22. This passage speaks about Abraham, a man who did not begin his journey of faith young nor full of certainty. Abraham was called by God as an adult, when his life was already relatively established. And the calling was simple and unsettling at the same time. Leave your land, your relatives, and go to the place I will show you. From the beginning, God did not explain everything. He simply asked for trust. Over the years, Abraham learned to walk with God through mistakes and victories, long seasons of waiting, and delayed promises. And the greatest of those promises was clear. He would have a son, and through that son, a great nation would be born. The problem was that time kept passing, and nothing happened. Abraham grew old. His wife, Sarah, did too. The promise seemed biologically impossible. But when everything pointed to the end of hope, God fulfilled what He had promised. Isaac was born. Isaac was not just a son. He was the proof that God keeps His promises, the fulfillment of decades of waiting, the confirmation that obedience had been worth it for years. Abraham could finally look at his life and say, "Now everything makes sense." And it is exactly at this point, when the promise feels secure, when the waiting is over, when the pain seems to be behind him, that God does something no one expects. In Genesis 22, God asks Abraham for something that contradicts everything he himself had promised. It is not a logical request, it is not a simple test, and it does not come with explanations. It is a calling that places Abraham before the greatest spiritual crisis of his life. This text was not written merely to shock us, it was preserved to teach us, to teach that obeying God does not always mean understanding what He is doing, to teach that sometimes the greatest test of faith comes after the promise has been fulfilled, and to teach that spiritual and emotional prosperity is born precisely in moments of extreme tension. Before we go into the details of the story, we need to see the whole picture, because the impact of this passage is only understood when we feel the weight of the decision Abraham was required to make. Genesis chapter 22 begins in a direct way, almost cold. There is no emotional buildup. There is no theological explanation. The text simply says that God calls Abraham, and Abraham answers. Then comes the command, a command that, to this day, still makes careful readers uncomfortable. God asks Abraham to offer his son, the son of the promise, as a sacrifice. Not just any son, not something generic, but Isaac, the one through whom every promise would be fulfilled. This is the point of tension in the passage. Because this command does not only pierce the heart of a father, it seems to pierce the very character of God. The question that echoes is unavoidable. How can God ask for something that contradicts what He Himself promised? And the text does not answer that question. It does not try to justify God. It simply shows Abraham's path. Abraham does not argue. He does not negotiate. He does not ask for a sign. He does not demand explanations. Abraham's silence is deafening. He rises early, gathers the wood, prepares what is needed, calls Isaac, and begins a 3-day journey. 3 days walking with his son beside him. 3 days carrying a decision he does not understand. 3 days in which God says, Absolutely nothing. That silence is part of the test, because obeying when God speaks is hard. But obeying when God is silent is even more painful. Along the way, Isaac asks a simple, innocent, but devastating question. "Father, where is the lamb for the sacrifice?" Abraham answers with a few words that reveal everything he is still able to hold on to. God will provide. He does not say he understands. He does not say he agrees. He simply declares trust. This overview reveals something essential. This story is not about a sacrifice. It is about absolute trust in the middle of contradiction. God seems to say no to the future he himself built. And Abraham must decide whether his faith is based on what God does or who God is. This tension prepares us to step into the heart of the narrative. Because now we will see, step by step, how obedience without understanding shows up in real life, and the emotional cost it carries. When we look more closely at Abraham's attitude, one thing stands out immediately: the absence of arguments. Abraham does not try to convince God that this makes no sense. He does not remind God of the promises. He does not use his long history of faithfulness as a bargaining chip. He simply obeys. But that does not mean there was no pain. The biblical text does not describe what Abraham felt inside, but the silence of the text is exactly the space where the pain screams. Every step of that journey was a step against logic. Every meter forward felt like moving farther away from the future he had waited for over decades. There is an important detail here. The Bible does not say that Abraham walked confidently and calmly. It simply says that he walked. Obedience is not the absence of inner conflict. It is a decision made in spite of conflict. Abraham could have stopped at any moment. He could have rationalized, "Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe God didn't really mean this. Maybe it's better to wait a little longer." But he keeps going. This teaches us something profound. Mature faith is not revealed in the words we say to God, but in the steps we take when there are no answers. Abraham also does not share the weight with anyone. He does not explain to Isaac what is happening. He does not gather servants to talk it through. This obedience is lonely. And here is one of the hardest pains of obeying without understanding. No one can walk this part of the road for you. There are moments when explaining yourself to others does not help. They would not understand. There are decisions that only make sense between you and God, even when you yourself do not fully understand them. Abraham's heart is being trained to trust not in the outcome, but in the character of God. He does not know how God will act. He does not know if there will be deliverance, but he knows who he is dealing with. This is the point where obedience stops being a strategy to make things work and becomes a real surrender. And the closer Abraham gets to the place of sacrifice, the clearer the cost of that surrender becomes. Because obeying God does not only cost external things, it costs control. It costs expectations. It costs the need to understand everything before acting. And it is exactly at this point, when there is nothing left to explain or negotiate, that the story reaches its most intense moment. Abraham arrives at the place God had indicated. Up to this point, there is still movement, walking, preparation, actions that keep the mind occupied. But now, everything slows down. Abraham builds the altar with his own hands. He arranges the wood. Every gesture is deliberate. Every action is irreversible. And then something happens that reveals the depth of this test. Isaac is placed on the altar. The text does not describe resistance. It does not report screams. The silence continues. This silence is not empty. It is heavy, because now there is no future left to imagine. There is no alternative plan. There is no visible way out. Here, obedience reaches its highest point, when there is nothing left to offer except total trust. And it is exactly at this moment, not before, not after, that God intervenes. The voice of God calls Abraham by name. And for the first time in the entire narrative, God speaks again. God's no is not against Abraham, it is against the sacrifice. God stops the act and reveals something essential. He never wanted Isaac's death. He wanted Abraham's heart. In place of the son, God provides a ram. This changes everything, because now it becomes clear that God was not destroying the promise He was revealing, the kind of faith that sustains the promise. God says no to the path Abraham imagined, but says yes to a deeper faith. This is a point that needs to be understood carefully. God does not test to discover something He does not know. He tests to reveal something we have not yet seen in ourselves. Abraham discovers that his faith was not in the gift, but in the giver. And this revelation brings a kind of prosperity that does not show up in numbers, but transforms the inside. The obedience that looked like loss becomes maturity. The pain that seemed pointless becomes growth. And this prepares us to understand something fundamental. When God says no, He is not denying love. He is protecting something greater than we can see in that moment. After the altar, after God's intervention, after the provided ram, Abraham's story could have ended there. But the Bible does not preserve this passage merely to tell a story of deliverance. It preserves it to teach us what truly prospers when we obey without understanding. Abraham comes down from that mountain with Isaac by his side. Externally, everything looks the same. The son is alive. The promise continues. But inwardly, nothing is the same. Before, Abraham's faith was deeply tied to the fulfillment of the promise. Now, it is anchored in the character of God. This is true spiritual prosperity, because spiritual prosperity is not being certain about tomorrow. It is trusting the one who governs tomorrow. Abraham learns something that can only be learned through pain. God is not trustworthy only when He explains. He is trustworthy even when He does not explain. This completely changes the relationship with God. From that moment on, Abraham no longer obeys expecting to understand later. He obeys because he knows who he is dealing with. And this produces emotional prosperity. Because a faith that depends on explanations lives tired. It needs constant signs. It is shaken by every delay. But a faith matured through difficult obedience produces inner rest. Abraham does not become insensitive. He becomes secure in knowing that God does not play with promises. God does not act out of cruelty. God does not ask in order to destroy, but in order to form. This prosperity does not show up in bank accounts, but it shows up in quieter nights, in less anxious decisions, in a heart that does not panic when God changes the script. When God says no, He is not taking away something essential. He is removing the illusion of control. And that, though painful, enriches the soul. Abraham leaves that experience knowing God as provider, but also knowing himself as someone capable of trusting beyond understanding. This is the kind of prosperity that remains when everything else is shaken. Everything we have seen so far does not belong only to Abraham's story. It belongs to our daily routines, our decisions, and the silent pains of modern life. Because even today, God still says no. Not as rejection, but as direction. God says no to relationships we deeply want, but that would pull us away from who He is forming within us. And obeying hurts, because the heart is already involved. God says no to professional opportunities that seem perfect, but would require compromising values. family time, or integrity. And obeying frustrates us because the effort was real. God says no to the timing we desire. We want it now. He works through process. Obedience without understanding shows up in the small daily decisions. When you choose honesty and lose an advantage, when you choose forgiveness and see no immediate change, when you choose to wait and it seems like everyone else is moving ahead. And in all of these moments, the same temptation arises. Is it really worth continuing to obey? Abraham's story teaches us that the value of obedience is not in the immediate outcome, but in the transformation it produces within us. Every no from God trains us to trust more deeply. Every season of waiting teaches us to rest. Every frustration reveals where our faith still needs to mature. In modern life, this takes shape through habits. Praying even when you do not feel like it, continuing to do what is right, even when no one notices, remaining faithful, even when you see no return. Obeying without understanding is not passivity. It is courage. It is saying, God, I do not see the whole picture, but I trust that you do. And this trust changes how we deal with money, work, relationships, and decisions. It makes us less reactive, less anxious, less trapped by immediacy. Obedience does not remove pain, but it prevents pain from destroying us from the inside. And that is deeply relevant to the life we are living today. Abraham's story ends without grand speeches. There are no detailed explanations from God. There are no answers to every question left along the way. And that is intentional, because the Bible does not teach us that faith is about understanding everything in the end. It teaches us that faith is trusting even when not everything is resolved. When God says no, He is not indifferent to our pain. He is leading us along a path where faith stops being fragile and becomes deep. Obedience without understanding forces us to decide, will we trust what we see, or will we trust the one who calls us? Abraham shows us that God never asks something to empty us, but to align us. Sometimes God's no is the most loving way of saying, trust me a little more. Perhaps you are living exactly this right now. You obeyed. You waited. You did what you believed was right. And even so, the outcome did not come. If that is your case, this message is for you. God does not waste sincere obedience. Even when you cannot see it, something is being formed within you. A stronger faith, a steadier heart, a peace that does not depend on immediate answers. Before we close, take a moment to reflect. In what area of your life might God be saying no today? What is this pain revealing about your faith? Do you trust God only when you understand? Or also when you do not? May you not abandon the path just because it has become difficult. May you not give up on obedience just because it hurt. Because, in the right time, you will realize God's no did not delay your life. It protected your faith. If this reflection spoke to your heart, keep it with you. Return to it on difficult days, and keep walking. God remains faithful, even when the path does not make sense.